In a world where the alien Zorgans had conquered Earth and subjugated humanity, life was a daily struggle for survival. The once proud human race had been reduced to little more than slaves, forced to toil endlessly for their alien overlords. The Zorgans, with their advanced technology and ruthless tactics, had easily overwhelmed Earth's defenses and established a brutal regime that crushed any resistance. In the ruins of what was once a thriving city, a small group of humans gathered in secret. They were the remnants of the resistance, a ragtag band of fighters who refused to submit to Zorgan rule. Among them was Jack, a former soldier who had seen his fair share of battles. His eyes burned with a fierce determination as he addressed the group. "We can't go on living like this," Jack said, his voice low but intense. "The Zorgans have taken everything from us. Our freedom, our dignity, our hope. But we can't let them win. We have to fight back." The others murmured their agreement, their faces etched with the same grim resolve. They had all lost someone to the Zorgans: family, friends, lovers. They had all endured the humiliation and brutality of life under alien rule. But they had not lost their spirit, their will to resist. "But how can we fight them?" asked Sarah, a young woman who had lost her parents in the initial invasion. "They have technology we can't even imagine, weapons that can vaporize us in an instant." Jack nodded, acknowledging the challenge they faced. "True, but we have something they don't: human ingenuity, human tenacity. We've been watching them, studying their weaknesses, and I think I know how we can strike a blow that will shake them to their core." The others leaned in closer, eager to hear his plan. Jack pulled out a battered map and spread it on the table before them. "We've intercepted a message," he said, his finger tracing a route on the map. "The Zorgan King himself is coming to Earth for a secret visit. He'll be vulnerable, exposed. If we can capture him, we can use him as leverage to force the Zorgans to leave Earth for good." The group exchanged glances, a mix of excitement and trepidation on their faces. It was a daring plan, one that could easily end in their deaths. But it was also a chance to strike a decisive blow against their oppressors, to take back their planet and their lives. "I'm in," said Mike, a burly man with a scar across his cheek. "I'd rather die fighting than live another day under Zorgan rule." One by one, the others voiced their agreement. They knew the risks, but they also knew that they had nothing left to lose. They had already lost everything that mattered. All they had left was their resistance, their defiance in the face of overwhelming odds. As the meeting broke up and the rebels went their separate ways, Jack lingered for a moment, staring at the map. He knew that the road ahead would be difficult, that many of them might not survive. But he also knew that they had no choice. They had to fight, had to resist, had to cling to the hope that one day humanity would be free again. And he would do whatever it took to make that happen, even if it meant sacrificing his own life. With a final nod of determination, Jack folded up the map and slipped out into the night, ready to set their daring plan into motion. The Zorgans had ruled Earth for far too long. It was time for humans to take back what was theirs, to show the galaxy that they would never be beaten, never be broken. It was time for humans to be unleashed. As dawn broke over the ruined city, Jack and his team set their plan into motion. They had spent the night preparing, gathering what weapons and equipment they could, going over every detail until they could recite it in their sleep. They knew they would only have one chance at this, one shot to capture the Zorgan King and change the course of history. Jack divided the team into two groups. He would lead the first group in a direct assault on the Zorgan stronghold where the king was staying. Meanwhile, Sarah would take the second group and create a diversion, drawing away as many Zorgan guards as possible. As they approached the stronghold, Jack felt his heart pounding in his chest. This was it, the moment they had been waiting for. He signaled to his team, and they split up, moving silently through the rubble-strewn streets. Sarah and her group reached their position first. They had rigged a series of explosives in an abandoned building near the stronghold. With a deep breath, Sarah detonated the charges. The building exploded in a massive fireball, sending debris flying in all directions. Instantly, alarms began to blare from the Zorgan stronghold. Guards poured out, rushing towards the site of the explosion. Sarah and her team opened fire, picking off the guards one by one. Meanwhile, Jack and his group used the distraction to slip inside the stronghold. They moved quickly, neutralizing the few guards that remained inside. Jack hacked into the Zorgan computer system, his fingers flying over the alien keyboard. He scanned the building schematics, searching for the king's location. "Got it," he said finally. "Top floor, heavily guarded." They made their way up, taking out Zorgan guards as they went. The fighting was intense, laser blasts scorching the walls around them. But Jack and his team were determined, driven by a fierce desire for freedom. As they burst into the king's chambers, they found themselves face to face with Zorlax himself. The Zorgan king was a towering figure, his scaly skin glistening in the dim light. He was flanked by his elite guards, each one armed to the teeth. For a moment, the two sides stared at each other, tension crackling in the air. Then, with a roar, Jack and his team attacked. It was a fierce battle, humans versus Zorgans in a deadly dance of laser fire and hand-to-hand combat. Despite being outnumbered and outgunned, the humans fought with a savage determination. They had the element of surprise on their side, and they pressed their advantage. One by one, the Zorgan guards fell, until only Zorlax himself was left. The Zorgan king was a formidable opponent, his strength and speed far beyond any human. But Jack was a skilled fighter, honed by years of resistance. He engaged Zorlax in a brutal melee, trading blows and laser blasts. In the end, it was human tenacity that won out. Jack managed to get behind Zorlax, wrapping his arm around the king's throat in a chokehold. The Zorgan thrashed and struggled, but Jack held on grimly, squeezing with all his might. Finally, Zorlax went limp, unconscious but alive. Jack and his team quickly bound the king's hands and feet, ensuring he couldn't escape. They had done it. Against all odds, they had captured the Zorgan king. As they dragged Zorlax from his chambers, Jack felt a surge of adrenaline and hope. This was the spark they needed, the chance to ignite a global uprising against the Zorgans. With the king as their prisoner, they finally had a chance to turn the tide, to make the aliens pay for all the suffering they had inflicted on humanity. The real battle was just beginning, Jack knew. But for the first time in a long time, he dared to believe that victory was possible, that humanity might just have a fighting chance. Jack and his team moved quickly, knowing they had little time before the Zorgans realized what had happened. They had to get Zorlax out of the stronghold and to a secure location before reinforcements arrived. Sarah and her group had managed to hold off the Zorgan guards, but they were taking heavy casualties. Jack radioed her, telling her to fall back to the rendezvous point. They would meet up and plan their next move. Dragging the unconscious Zorlax through the battle-scarred corridors, Jack and his team finally made it outside. The streets were chaos, filled with smoke and the sounds of laser fire. Zorgan ships streaked overhead, searchlights scanning the ground. They stuck to the shadows, moving as fast as they could while still keeping Zorlax secure. Every step was a struggle, every breath a risk. But they kept going, driven by the knowledge that they held the key to humanity's freedom in their hands. Finally, they'd reached the rendezvous point, an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. Sarah and what remained of her team were already there, nursing their wounds and watching the perimeter. Jack and his group burst in, Zorlax's limp form slung between them. They quickly secured the king, tying him to a chair and setting up a perimeter guard. They couldn't afford to take any chances. As Zorlax began to stir, Jack stood before him, his weapon trained on the king's head. Zorlax blinked, his reptilian eyes focusing on Jack's face. For a moment, there was silence, the two mortal enemies staring each other down. "You think you've won, human," Zorlax hissed, his voice dripping with contempt. "But you have no idea of the forces you're dealing with. The Zorgan Empire will crush you like the insects you are. Jack just smiled, a grim, determined smile. Maybe, he said, but we've got you. And that means we got a chance. He turned to Sarah, who was setting up a video link. They had prepared a message, one that would be broadcast to every screen and speaker on the planet. It was time to let the world know that the resistance was real, and that they had struck a blow against the Zorgans. Sarah nodded, indicating that the link was ready. Jack took a deep breath, then began to speak. "People of Earth," he said, his voice ringing with conviction. "For too long, we have lived under the boot of Zorgan oppression. For too long, we have been slaves in our own world. But no more." He stepped aside, revealing Zorlax tied to the chair. There were gasps and cries of shock from the assembled rebels. This was the face of their enemy, the embodiment of everything they hated and feared. "We have captured Zorlax, the Zorgan king," Jack continued. "And we will not release him until the Zorgans agree to leave Earth forever and grant us our freedom. This is not a request. This is a demand, backed by the full force of the human spirit." He paused, letting his words sink in. "To every human out there, we say this. The time to fight is now. Rise up against your oppressors. Join us in our struggle. Together, we can take back our world and our future." With that, he cut the link. The message was out there now, spreading across the globe like wildfire. There would be no going back, no hiding in the shadows anymore. Jack turned to his team, seeing the determination and hope in their eyes. They had struck the first blow, but the war was far from over. The Zorgans would come for them with everything they had, but they would be ready. "Get some rest," he told them. "We've got a long fight ahead of us, but we're not alone anymore. The whole world is watching, and together we're going to show the Zorgans what humanity is capable of." As the team dispersed to their posts, Jack allowed himself a moment of quiet satisfaction. They had done the impossible, struck at the very heart of Zorgan power. And now, for the first time in years, he dared to hope that a free Earth might not just be a dream, but a reality worth fighting for. As Jack's message spread across the planet, the human population reacted with a mix of shock, joy, and unbridled rage. For years, they had suffered under the Zorgans' cruel rule, their spirits crushed, their hope all but extinguished. But now, seeing their hated oppressor captured and helpless, a fire rekindled in their hearts. In cities and towns across the globe, people took to the streets in spontaneous celebrations. They waved makeshift flags, chanted slogans of defiance, and embraced each other with tears of relief. For the first time in years, they allowed themselves to believe that a better future was possible. But the celebrations were short-lived. The Zorgans, reeling from the news of their king's capture, responded with swift and brutal force. Warships descended from the sky, raining laser fire on the jubilant crowds. Ground troops marched through the streets, rounding up anyone who dared to resist. In the face of this onslaught, many humans fled, seeking shelter wherever they could find it. But others, emboldened by Jack's message and the capture of Zorlax, stood their ground. They fought back with whatever weapons they could muster: rocks, homemade explosives, captured Zorgan tech. It was a desperate, bloody struggle, but the human spirit proved resilient. In one city, a group of rebels managed to take control of a Zorgan armory, distributing weapons to the eager populace. In another, a daring hacker managed to disrupt the Zorgans' communication network, throwing their forces into disarray. Meanwhile, in the warehouse where Zorlax was being held, Jack and his team watched the chaos unfold on flickering screens. They knew they had lit the spark of rebellion, but the fire was spreading faster than they had anticipated. Jack turned to Zorlax, who was watching the screens with a mix of rage and disbelief. "Call off your forces," Jack demanded. "Order them to stand down and leave Earth. Do it now, or we'll execute you live for the whole world to see." Zorlax snarled, his eyes burning with hatred, but he knew he had no choice. Slowly, reluctantly, he nodded. Sarah set up the video link again, and Zorlax was shoved in front of the camera. In a voice thick with suppressed fury, he gave the order for all Zorgan forces to cease fire and withdraw to their ships. Across the planet, Zorgan troops began to disengage, falling back to their strongholds and transports. The human rebels, sensing victory, pressed their advantage, harrying the retreating aliens with renewed vigor. But Jack knew this was only the beginning. The Zorgans might be retreating, but they wouldn't give up Earth without a fight. They would regroup, gather their strength, and return with a vengeance. He gathered his team around him, their faces grimy and exhausted but alight with a newfound sense of purpose. "We've got a lot of work ahead of us," he told them. "We need to organize the resistance, establish secure communications, gather intelligence on Zorgan movements. This is a war, and we're going to have to fight it on every front." They nodded, ready to follow him into whatever battles lay ahead. They had tasted freedom, and they would not let it slip away again. As the team set to work, Jack allowed himself a moment to reflect on how far they had come. A few days ago, they had been a ragtag band of rebels, scraping out a meager existence in the ruins of their world. Now, they were the spark that had ignited a global uprising, the leaders of a movement that could change the course of history. It was a heavy responsibility, but one he was ready to bear. For the sake of all humanity, for the chance to build a better world, he would fight to his last breath. And as he looked out at the smoke-filled sky, he knew that across the planet, millions of others were making the same vow. The Zorgans had awoken a sleeping giant, and Earth would never be the same again. In the days following Zorlax's capture and the Zorgan retreat, the human resistance worked tirelessly to consolidate their gains. They reached out to rebel cells in other cities, sharing resources and information, coordinating their efforts into a cohesive global movement. At the heart of it all was Jack and his team, working around the clock to plan their next move. They knew they had to strike while the iron was hot, to capitalize on the momentum they had generated. And they knew that the key to it all was Zorlax. The Zorgan king was more than just a prisoner. He was a symbol. As long as they held him, they held the hope of humanity in their hands. Jack called a meeting of the rebel leaders, representatives from across the planet joining via secure video links. "We need to show the world that we've won," he told them, "that the Zorgans are not invincible. And we need to do it in a way that nobody will ever forget." He laid out his plan, a march, a triumphant procession through the streets of the capital city, with Zorlax as the centerpiece. They would drag the Zorgan king before the cheering crowds, a living trophy of their victory. Some of the leaders were hesitant. It was a risky move, they argued. It would paint a huge target on their backs. The Zorgans would stop at nothing to get their king back. But Jack was adamant. "That's exactly why we have to do it," he said. "We have to show them that we're not afraid, that we're willing to fight for our freedom, no matter the cost. This march will be a declaration of our resolve, a message to the Zorgans and to the world." In the end, the leaders agreed. The march was set for the following day, in the heart of the ruined capital. As dawn broke, the rebels gathered, thousands strong. They came from all walks of life, soldiers and civilians, young and old, united by their desire for liberation. At the head of the procession was Jack, flanked by his most trusted lieutenants. And there, stumbling and shackled, was Zorlax, the once mighty Zorgan king reduced to a pitiful spectacle. As they marched through the rubble-strewn streets, more and more people joined them. They poured out of shattered buildings and underground hideouts, their voices joining in a swelling chorus of defiance. "Freedom," they chanted. "Earth for humans." The sound was deafening, a roar of jubilation and rage that shook the very foundations of the city. Zorlax, for his part, seemed to shrink with every step. His reptilian features were contorted in a mix of fear and disgust, his eyes darting nervously at the sea of human faces. At the city's central square, they came to a halt. A makeshift stage had been erected, and Jack climbed up to address the crowd. "Today," he cried, his voice booming across the square. "We show the galaxy that humanity will never submit, that we will fight for our right to live free, no matter the odds." The crowd erupted in cheers, a deafening roar that seemed to shake the sky itself. Jack raised his fist in triumph, basking in the moment. But even as he did so, he knew that this was just the beginning. The Zorgans would return, with all the might of their empire behind them. The road ahead would be long and hard, filled with sacrifice and pain. But looking out at the sea of determined faces, at the unbreakable spirit of his fellow humans, Jack knew that they would prevail. They had tasted freedom, and they would never let it go again. With a final defiant cry, he thrust Zorlax forward, presenting the defeated king to the jubilant masses. It was a moment that would go down in history, a turning point in the struggle for Earth's liberation. And as the march continued, winding through the shattered streets of the city, Jack knew that the whole galaxy was watching. Humanity had declared itself a force to be reckoned with, and nothing would ever be the same. The march through the capital was the spark that lit the fire of global rebellion. Emboldened by the sight of Zorlax humiliated and the rebels triumphant, people across the planet rose up against their Zorgan oppressors. In every city, in every town, in every remote outpost, humans took up arms and fought back. They stormed Zorgan barracks, sabotaged communication towers, and ambushed patrols. It was a grassroots uprising, a spontaneous outpouring of pent-up rage and desire for freedom. The Zorgans, still reeling from the loss of their king, were caught off guard by the scale and ferocity of the human resistance. Their forces were spread thin, trying to maintain control over a planet that was rapidly slipping from their grasp. In the capital, Jack and his team worked feverishly to coordinate the global effort. They communicated with rebel cells, allocated resources, and planned strategic strikes against key Zorgan targets. But they knew that the Zorgans wouldn't give up easily. Even now, reinforcements were surely on their way from the Zorgan homeworld, a vast armada that could easily crush the fledgling human rebellion. Time was running out. They needed to strike a decisive blow, to force the Zorgans into a position where they would have no choice but to negotiate. And for that, they needed Zorlax. Jack confronted the captive king, who had been kept under heavy guard since the march. "The way I see it," Jack said, "you have two choices. You can cooperate with us, use your authority to order a full Zorgan surrender, or we can hand you over to the crowd and let them have their revenge. Your call." Zorlax glared at him, hatred burning in his reptilian eyes. But he was no fool. He knew that the human mob would tear him limb from limb given the chance. "I will need assurances," he hissed, "for my safety and the safety of my people." Jack nodded. "We're not monsters," he said. "We don't want genocide. We want justice. A fair trial for you and your top lieutenants, a truth and reconciliation process for the rest, and then a peaceful transition to human self-rule." It was a tense negotiation, with much back and forth and no small amount of threats on both sides. But in the end, a deal was struck. Zorlax would order a complete Zorgan stand-down and withdrawal from Earth. In return, he and his top officials would receive a fair trial, and the rest of the Zorgans would be allowed to leave in peace. It was a historic moment. For the first time in years, the guns fell silent. Zorgan ships lifted off from Earth's surface, leaving behind a planet that was battered and bruised, but finally free. In the aftermath, there was much work to be done. Governments had to be reformed, infrastructure rebuilt, wounds both physical and psychological healed. But for now, there was celebration. In the streets of every city, humans danced and sang and wept with joy. They had done the impossible. They had taken back their world. And at the center of it all was Jack, the unlikely hero who had started it all. He was hailed as a savior, a liberator, the man who had led humanity out of the darkness and into the light. But Jack knew that the true credit belonged to all of them, to every man, woman and child who had fought and bled and died for the dream of a free earth. As he stood on a balcony overlooking the cheering crowds, he felt a sense of profound humility and gratitude. They had entrusted him with an awesome responsibility, and he vowed to spend the rest of his life living up to it. Earth was free. And as long as he drew breath, Jack swore it would remain so. No matter what threats might come from the stars, humanity would face them together, united and unafraid. It was a new dawn, a new beginning, and the future, for the first time in a long time, was full of hope. In the days following the Zorgan withdrawal, a sense of normalcy began to return to Earth. People emerged from their hiding places, blinking in the sunlight like newborns. They started the long, hard process of rebuilding their shattered world. But for Jack and the other rebel leaders, there was one piece of unfinished business: the trial of Zorlax and his top lieutenants. It was a trial unlike any in human history. The defendants were not human, the crimes not bound by the laws of any one nation. It was a trial that would set a precedent for how humanity would deal with extraterrestrial threats in the future. The court was set up in the ruins of the old United Nations building in New York. Judges and lawyers were drawn from around the world, the best legal minds of a newly united humanity. Zorlax and his co-defendants were brought in under heavy guard. They looked diminished without their armor and weapons, but there was still an aura of menace about them, a reminder of the terror they had inflicted on humanity for so long. The trial lasted for weeks. Witness after witness took the stand, painting a picture of Zorgan atrocities that left even the most hardened listeners in tears. Tales of mass executions, of torture and experimentation, of the systematic eradication of human culture and identity. Through it all, Zorlax remained defiant. He claimed that the Zorgans had a right to rule, that humans were a lesser species destined to serve. He showed no remorse, no hint of regret for the millions of lives his regime had destroyed. In the end, the verdict was unanimous. Zorlax and his lieutenants were found guilty of crimes against humanity, of genocide and war crimes on a scale never before seen on Earth. The sentence was equally historic. The Zorgan leaders were to be imprisoned for life, not on Earth, but on a specially constructed prison on the Moon. They would spend the rest of their days in isolation, never again able to threaten the peace and freedom of humanity. It was a controversial decision. Many humans wanted blood, demanded the execution of the Zorgan leaders as retribution for their crimes. But Jack and the other rebel leaders stood firm. "We are better than they are," Jack said in a broadcast to the world. "We do not seek revenge, but justice. By imprisoning them, we show that we are a civilized species, that we believe in the rule of law even for our worst enemies." It was a message that resonated around the world. As the Zorgan leaders were shuttled off to their lunar prison, a sense of closure descended on humanity. A dark chapter in their history had ended, and a new one was beginning. In the aftermath of the trial, Jack found himself at a crossroads. He had never aspired to leadership, had always seen himself as a soldier, a fighter. But now, the people were looking to him for guidance, for a vision of what their new world could be. He thought long and hard about what he wanted to say, about the legacy he wanted to leave. And when he finally spoke, it was with a clarity and conviction that inspired millions. "We have won our freedom," he said. "But freedom is not an end in itself. It is an opportunity, a chance to build something better. A world of justice, of equality, of peace. A world where every human, no matter their origin or status, has the chance to thrive and prosper. It will not be easy," he continued. "There will be setbacks and challenges, disagreements and divisions. But if we hold true to our principles, if we remember the sacrifices that brought us to this moment, then I have no doubt that we will succeed." The Zorgans thought they could break us, could reduce us to slaves and savages. But they underestimated the strength of the human spirit, the unbreakable will that lies within each and every one of us. We are humans, and we are unleashed. Let us go forward together into a future of our own making. As the applause washed over him, Jack felt a sense of hope that he had never known before. The road ahead would be long and hard, but for the first time, it was a road of humanity's own choosing. And that made all the difference. Years passed, and Earth changed in ways that once seemed unimaginable. Under Jack's leadership, and with the help of a dedicated global community, the planet began to heal. Cities were rebuilt, not as they were, but as they could be: green, sustainable, and equitable. The old divisions of race, nation, and class began to fade away, replaced by a new sense of global unity. The technologies left behind by the Zorgans were repurposed for peaceful ends. Advances in medicine, energy, and transportation transformed the quality of life for billions. Poverty and hunger became distant memories, as did the threat of war and violence. But perhaps the greatest change was in humanity itself. The experience of occupation and liberation had forged a new spirit, a sense of resilience and determination that could not be broken. No longer content to be passive victims, humans began to take an active role in shaping their destiny. They reached out to the stars, establishing contact with other civilizations, forming alliances and partnerships that spanned the galaxy. And at the forefront of this new era was Jack. Though he had never sought power, he found himself in a position of great influence, a trusted voice in the interstellar community. He used that influence wisely, always striving for peace, always putting the needs of his fellow humans first. Under his guidance, Earth became a beacon of hope and freedom, a model for what a united, compassionate society could achieve. But Jack never forgot the lessons of the past, or the sacrifices that had brought them to this point. Every year, on the anniversary of the liberation, he would journey to the lunar prison where Zorlax and his lieutenants were held. He would stand before them, not in anger or triumph, but in solemn remembrance. "You thought you could break us," he would say, "but you only made us stronger. You showed us what we are capable of when we stand together." And then he would leave, returning to an Earth that was thriving, an Earth that had learned to turn its face towards the future. As Jack grew older, he began to think about his own legacy. He had never married, never had children, dedicating his life entirely to the cause of human freedom. But he knew that his work was not finished, that there was still so much more to do. And so, he began to train the next generation of leaders, young men and women who shared his vision of a better world. He taught them the values of compassion, of courage, of unwavering commitment to justice. And when the time came for him to step aside, he did so with a sense of peace and fulfillment. He knew that the future was in good hands, that the spirit of humanity would continue to shine brightly. In his final years, Jack often found himself thinking back to that fateful day, the day when a small group of rebels had dared to stand against an alien tyrant. It seemed like a lifetime ago, a distant memory from a darker time. But he never forgot the lesson of that day, the truth that had guided him throughout his life. That freedom is not given, but taken. That hope can spring from the darkest of places, and that the human spirit, when unleashed, is the most powerful force in the universe. And as he took his last breaths, surrounded by the love and gratitude of a world he had helped to save, Jack smiled. His journey was over, but the journey of humanity was just beginning. They had fought for their right to live free, and they had won. Now it was up to them to make the most of that freedom, to build a future worthy of the sacrifices that had brought them to this moment. The Zorgans had called them savages, had tried to crush their will. But in the end, it was humanity that had triumphed, humanity that had proven itself the masters of its own destiny. Earth was free, and it would remain so, as long as there were those willing to fight for it, as long as the spirit of humanity, the spirit embodied by Jack and all those who had followed him, continued to burn brightly. It was a legacy that would endure, a testament to the unbreakable will of a species that had refused to be broken, a species that had looked into the face of tyranny and said, "No more," a species unleashed,